Welcome to the first episode of SEO Recaps. These will just be short recaps as life is busy and we know that not everyone has the time for an hour-and-a-half episode. So don't fret if you don't, we have you covered. Without further ado, on to the show. Welcome ladies, welcome gentlemen, and as always, an extra special welcome to that drunk avatar in the back. Seriously man, you keep us going. Welcome all to the SEO Episode 1 Recap Log-On Sequence. We start with our four streamers, Poltergeisha, PME or Stats, Slain, and Crystal Faye, who are making their way to the VR room where the coffin-like VR pods that will become their home await. After getting lectured by the technicians about health and safety, including the fact the company will be willing to pull them out at any time, they move to settle into the shining machines. Once inside, they find themselves floating in a deep void, where they see their new selves for the first time. Cassandra appears first. A mess of pink hair flows around her lithe and athletic frame. Her fin-like ears twitch as she gets used to the rustle of the black, gold, and yellow corset. The weight of a rapier and a finely carved crossbow hanging off her form was more noticeable than expected. Her blue eyes twitch as she sees the next to materialize. A large, muscular Minotaur woman, Dominica, flashes into view. Bronze skin, brown fur that wraps around the legs near her hooves, and dark hair that flows freely from underneath the blue and silver Roman-style helmet, out of which two bullhorns stick up towards the sky. The rest of the Amazonian outfit she wears is the same blue and silver. A long sword and shield bearing a stylized depiction of a raging bull complete the look. Next comes a mist that forms into a figure that quickly elongates. The top half of Satiella is of a dark-skinned woman, with long strands of white hair that slip out of the dark hood she wears. Red pupils and yellow eyes stare out of her face that contains a set of grinning fangs, though most eye-catching is a snake tail that grows from the bottom of her torso, a massive writhing thing, purple and white. Last but not least, Slain, Zara now, appears. Two woven ears poke out of the curly black hair that falls down her back. Her body, scarred, some old, some new, is thinly muscled and twitches as though expecting a fight. Yellow eyes scan the gloves she knows will spring out into metallic blades, as she checks the belt and leg pouches she carries for her gear. The long, poofy black tail flicks back and forth, seemingly in anticipation. Once the four had all logged in, the world began to materialize into being one sensation at a time. The first was sound, the rustling of grass and the rushing of a river, and finally the buzzing of insects. Next was the smells, a heady scent of exotic flowers too rich to ever be anything real. Zara, as a shifter with a keener sense of smell, received just a hint of smoke underpinning the floral sensations. Finally, vision and touch came into play as the world comes into focus. First, the skybox displaying stars among a deep blue sky. A sun, barely peeking over the horizon to the east, shines light just enough for those without dark vision to see the broad shapes around them. As the four stared around, a ramshackle wooden wall appeared, encircling the settlement of Rivernest. Small splotches of yellow and violet flowers bloom from the base of the wall, giving colours to the otherwise green and brown landscapes. Peeking above the wall to the east and west, a stone guard towers watching over the river that rushes nearby. In front of the sturdy wooden gate stands a humanoid figure in pristine white full plate, a unicorn horn spiraling up from the center of the helmet. Like Dominica, the figure has hooves instead of feet. The figure, an overly muscular unicorn man in full plate with a giant axe strapped to his back, greets them in a booming voice, complaining that the delegates kept him waiting. Seemingly uninterested in their comments, he turned and with one hand pushed open the massive wooden gates into the settlement, a feat that in no way impressed Satiella. No sir. Inside the walls of Rivernest, it is much more of a tent city than any settlement most would recognize, though a few permanent buildings stood. To the east of the gates sits a mess hall, a rather large log building with a thatched roof and no windows. To the north is a covering for the docks, where barrels and boxes are stacked away from the elements. Smoke drifts up from several cook fires lit around the tents, all currently unattended. A small muddy path has been beaten between the log pile to the northwest of you, the docks to the north, and the gate where you currently stand. Striding with evident purpose, the guard captain moves over to a small overweight woman, with messy brown hair and curly grey ram horns. She names him Wynne, before nervously introducing herself as Dr. Muncher. As pleasantries begin to be exchanged, the earth starts to rumble and tremble, before a massive worm with dark flesh and acid streaming from numerous wounds that cover its body breaches the ground. The name that flashes above its head states, Injured Acid Worm, CR-15. As the group starts to get their bearings, smaller worms burst out of the ground. Wynn runs off to deal with the outbreak, leaving our heroines deal with the massive worm alone. As the worm roars and thrashes, destroying more of the fence, Cassandra Gilsworth, Triton Bard, shouted out her vicious mockery, though the enraged worm seems to barely notice. Next up was Zara Grimcore, Lycan Bloodhunter. With a flick of her wrist, she unsheathed her metal claws, dragging them along the back of her neck. A hiss of pain was drowned out by the crackle of the fire as one of her claws burst into flames, due to her Rite of the Flame ability. With a snarl, she charged the beast, digging her claws into its scarred hide. With surprising ease, she dodged backwards, avoiding the spray of acidic blood that burst from the wound. Dominica, Minotaur Glory Paladin, attacked next, her longsword slicing the air. The worm, however, racked from pain, dodged out of the way, turning and hissing as Sadiella, Yontai Sorcerer, blasted it with a cone of fire, her burning hand spell. The issue, of course, being that the worm busted through a wooden wall, the remains of which lit up like a bonfire. Taking damage from the flames, the worm shrieked out in pain before it struck out at Dominica, but she easily blocked it with her shield. Moving to the side, Cassandra levels her crossbow and lines up a shot, snapping off a bolt into the worm. Almost as quickly as the bolt travels, she turns and throws out a quick bit of inspiration to Zara. The bolt causes the worm to thrash, and while Zara dodged, Dominica was smacked by the worm and shoved backwards. Zara, blade still aflame, ducks in under the thrashing coils while striking and dodging the acid once again. Dominica, deciding that the worm was moving too much for her sword, decided to utilize a new feature of her monster race, horns. Scraping the ground with her foot, she charges forward, not quite managing to pierce the worm's flesh once again. Sadiella throws another spell, a ray of frost dealing 2 of its last 3 health. With a smile, the group watched it move before falling dead as the fire took away its last bit of health. As they started to congratulate one another on the fight, a blue box with white text appeared. Random encounter, Injured Acid Worm. An injured acid worm has crawled under the river to attack your settlement, and you have successfully repelled it. Difficulty, D. Items dropped. 200 gold per party member, 1 health potion per party member, 2 units of worm meat per party member, 1 vial of acid. The group quickly debate who gets the acid before deciding Zara can smear it on her claws for extra damage. At this point, they remember the still burning walls. Dominica grabs a shovel and starts to bury the fire with earth, as Sadiella casts Shape Water to get water from the nearby river. Once the fire had been dealt with, Dominica took charge, leading the group to find Guard Captain Wynn, to ask if anything like this had happened before. He responds no, telling the group the worm was there from the Sanguine Sands to the northeast. Sadiella points out that it was injured, meaning something probably attacked it and drove it here. None of the rest of the group liked that bit of news. The group then debated if they should bury the monster or try and utilize the massive worm as easily accessible meat. Zara, checking the database, learned that it was technically edible, but only with a highly skilled chef preparing it. Finding out they had no such chef, Sadiella proposed freezing it for later, to which they all agreed. Wynn, agreeing, went off to go and get Jaimiella, the elven hunter. She, with a smirk and a sarcastic comment, agreed to cut up the worm. Once that was dealt with, they decided to activate the tutorial for town building. The general gist is they can assign different members of the village, or themselves in groups of 2 to 4, to work on a task. It will take 1 to 3 days depending on the task, and will cost an assortment of gold, again depending on the building type. Residents can deny an assignment if they are unable to perform a task, or if they have no one on staff who can lead. The town guard cannot build a factory, for instance, but they can help if an architect is on hand. Blueprints, or designs, will be needed to be found in the world to build the buildings, though residents can sometimes have them already. While trying to make the decision on who to fix the wall, the group decides to take a short rest and head to the mess hall. Inside they meet the dapperly dressed lizard folk, Leith, who serves exotic juices to orbit Zara, who requests a whiskey. Drinks served, he proceeds to tell them the following rumors. A group of alchemists have taken residence in a nearby cave. The different groups in the Gloom Glades are fighting once again. There are irregular weather events in the Pleasant Plains. Supply carts are not making it through the pass in the Mad Mountains. They haven't heard anything recent from the Sanguine Sands. While resting, Cassandra decides to create a makeshift stage out of tables, before pulling out a finely carved coral harp. Before she can start, Zara jumps up beside her with a set of pan flutes, and together they start to play. Though the song is short, the 2 draw in the rest of the townsfolk into the bar, who sit and happily listen to the music. This includes, but not those they met before, Hobart, the hill giant who is dressed like a stereotypical fisherman crouched in a corner, a female werebore named Tusks, who is short, full-figured and carrying a woodcutter's axe, A pretty water elemental whose stained blacksmith garment contains the ever-flowing water that makes up her body. 2 guards who are identical in build, both bald and muscular. The only difference is one wears a green pin on their leather armor. Taking advantage of the gathering, Dominica moves across to ask Wynne about the cave. He tells her they know little apart from that there are signs of life inside of it, and that Hymelia has been hunting in other regions as well. When asked, he gives them directions to the cave. Satiella, during this conversation, decides to speak to Hymelia about having her go and hunt down whatever attacked the worm. With a sneer, the hunter asks who is going to gather the food in her stead, leading Zara to nominate herself. Sick of Hymelia's sass, Satiella attempts to trip her up as the elven woman leaves for the mission by casting Ray of Frost on the floor. Unfortunately, the little prank doesn't work as expected, with Hymelia managing to keep her footing as she skated out of the room. Annoyed, the group split up into 2 groups. The first, made of Cassandra and Satiella, go fishing with Hobart, who teach them how to utilize a fishing pole and is impressed by Cassandra's ability to catch fish underwater. The second team, made of Zara and Dominica, go out hunting, finding a nest of dog-sized caterpillars and spending 3 days harvesting them. Once reunited, the group decide to stock up on food and water before heading over to the cave. The first thing they discover on the trip is the grave of a baby bird, which they spend some time at before moving on. Just before nightfall, they see a shooting star, though Dominica gets a little more. She sees a shadowy humanoid figure that appears and then vanishes as quickly as the star did. Making camp, the group discusses the figure, but comes to no real answer, making sure to post watches when they sleep. The next day, just before the cave, they find a rickety sign with the words, "Take 1" scrawled on it, with a string of 4 golden coins attached to the bottom. Suspicious of a free lunch, the group declare it is some kind of angular worm or signpost mimic and hurry on. Soon enough, they find the cave, a rocky outcropping with 2 unlit alchemical lanterns. Zara, taking the lead, with Satiella, Cassandra, and then Dominica taking the rear, the group makes its way into the cave complex. Once there, Zara manages to spot and accidentally trigger a poison gas trap, breathing in. Just before the session ends, they hear a slithering in the dark. This has been a Nimbus Strider production. We thank you for listening.